morning, everybody, and thank you so much for your introduction, Sophie and Paul, for the really exciting task you gave us already today, and I hope I can deliver. I'm sure I will not be able to answer all your questions, but maybe, yeah, some of them I can sort of give some food for thought. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm so happy that already yesterday we had so many inspiring examples, and it gave me, and I think there are more people today who made their PowerPoint yesterday and adjusted it, and they wanted to have more sort of changes and more input. So I had this issue as well, that I thought, I should change things, so yeah. Anyhow, let's see. So some parts of my lecture I will read, and other parts I will just go off track and yeah, see where we end up. Okay. How can museums stay relevant in our super diverse society? According to the organizers of this conference, according to the project leaders, the steering group, museums can play an important role by working on intangible cultural heritage alongside heritage practitioners. But not all museums are aware of the opportunities, and there are a lot of misunderstandings. As the project description or application states, the full meaning and reach of the concept ICH is often not entirely grasped or proves difficult to apply. Generally speaking, in-depth knowledge of the ICH paradigm and methodologies is still limited among museum professionals and experts. In short, there is work to do for us. Museums can do better, hence this conference and hence the project. In my lecture, I will argue that museums can stay or become relevant if the staff and the people they work with demonstrate awareness of the fundamentally networked character of the world we live in, if they demonstrate transparency in their strategic decision making, if they are willing to aim for an open conversation about collecting and exhibitioning practices, if they invest, finally, in new registration tools that leave room for multiple meanings and significances. But in my view, what they don't have to give up is their core business, which is putting things or items on display so that people can see it, hear it, touch it, experience it, discuss it, contest it. And this is not self-evident. Many of us have become used to see heritage not as a thing, but as a process, as a practice. As Sharon MacDonald puts it, heritage is a form, a practice of past present thinking. Many of us, if not all, embrace this dynamic approach to heritage. Yet we also know that in everyday museum practice, it remains a rather abstract, theoretical way of thinking. Museum professionals, either or not in conversation with their audiences, are used to work towards developing the collection of items and staging performances. We have been offered some interesting examples yesterday. If we take that as a matter of fact and consider it an essential aspect of museum practice, the idea of culture as a process might be hindering us in our daily work. It is as if we are forced to keep shooting a moving target. What now if we decide to do less? And for a change, carefully select one item at a time and talk about it with each other and reflect on the way how we talk about it. It is a way of combining two practices. The practice of musealization, of heritagization, and critical ethnological reflection. And then what happens if we turn this, for this exercise, towards a theoretical framework or approach that fits our super diverse society? What I have in mind and what I want to share with you is a way of working with heritage, tangible or intangible, this is not an issue, for which Marloes Willemse and I invented the term emotion networking. I promised the organizers, I promised the organizers of this conference not to talk only about emotion networking, because I talk about it all day. It's a sort of obsession. But I'm just excited about sort of this idea. And I also want to talk about it because there are many challenges in this using or developing this concept into a method. So it's also, I want to share sort of ongoing research with you. And I hope that it gives you some food for thought and inspires you also. My lecture consists of 3 parts. First, I will explain why I think that a network perspective, or to be more precise, Bruno Latour's actor network theory, can be inspiring as a way to approach heritage. In the second part, I will share with you some examples of working with this network approach in various settings. These are all super diverse in a way, these settings, because all these settings are made up of a diversity of actors, humans and non-humans. All individual actors with unique agencies. In the final part of my lecture, I will discuss a bit, very briefly, the role of the professional, and I know that this is a theme of an upcoming conference in the project. The role of the professional, or you could also say the role of the museum in the network. So, let me start with a bit of theory. Working with a network approach means that we approach the world we live in as a network with different interconnected nodes. Network constellations can change. The idea of the network can be helpful not only for acknowledging different or shifting positions towards an item, an object. And this is not my own slide, so if you take a picture, please take the, the reference also. I got it from the internet. So the idea of the network can be helpful not only for acknowledging different or shifting positions towards an item, but also for foregrounding connectivity and interdependency. Networks consist of nodes and links and can expand or implode like constellations. Inspired by Bruno Latour's actor network theory, again a slide I borrowed from the internet, and by Manuel Castell's trilogy, The Information Age, Economy, Society and Culture, both from 1996, in recent decades the field of network studies have developed. And already yesterday also we sort of heard the term coming by. It's nothing new, but it's just sort of to repeat and to rehearse. Yesterday we had a long discussion about sort of how do we keep using concepts that are already, of course, often a long time there. So the only thing we want to add maybe is a certain way of using this idea, of working with a certain concept. So this research, this network approach has developed into a field of network studies, characterizing individual actors, groups and things as nodes, and their relationships or interactions as links or ties. And these ideas might be fruitful for heritage work. And visiting heritage as a network exercise invites participants to better recognize different positions and kinds of relationships, including our own as professionals or experts. It encourages heritage workers to involve or get involved in ever new nodes and to discover and produce multiple ties. As Perla Innocenti has shown in her research on cultural networks in transnational heritage collaborations, networks can be shaped, weakened, and strengthened. By acknowledging these potentialities, we can aim for a better understanding of our own roles, our own possible impact in heritage making, and a better understanding of the divergent interests and the emotions, conflicting emotions, in this super diverse world. So in a network, many nodes, connection points can be found. Things we can connect to, connect with. In the language of museums and folklore, objects and itemized traditions can be labeled or approached as nodes. These items, these museum or folklore items, these musealized or folklorized nodes can be chosen by a curator because she or he fell in love with it. Or maybe they just ended up in a collection by accident, or in a repertoire by accident, or because someone fell in love with it. Someone else incorporated them. Maybe they have text labels attached to them. Maybe not. But let's imagine that we focus for a moment on one specific item, one node, and put it in the middle of the network, in the middle of the exhibition room. Here it is. It can be anything. A pencil, a building, a statue, a performance, a ritual, whatever. Then the question is, should we make a distinction between nodes that are objects, as in a collection, and the nodes that are a tradition, as in a repertoire? If we follow Bruno Latour, the answer should be no. All things have agency. Or as I heard him explaining in a lecture I found on YouTube, all things have politics. If by politics is meant ways to make people do things. Again, this is in fact nothing new. For those of us who are familiar with material culture studies, European ethnology, and so on, there is a long history of research into the relation between the tangible and the intangible, the material and the immaterial. The two cannot be separated. Of course, in the case of staged performances, people are involved. And as Kirstenblatt-Gimlet has stressed, unlike things, animals, and plants, people are not only objects of cultural preservation, but also subjects. They are not only cultural carriers and transmitters, but also agents in the heritage enterprise itself. So people make traditions. But theoretically spoken, we can say that people make objects as well, by giving meaning to these objects. Objects are things loaded with meanings, connotations. People make heritage tangible and intangible. So, I say, in selecting an item to put in the middle of the room, we don't have to worry too much about what we choose. It can be a museum piece or a practice, a certain craft or a practical skill. We can choose an item from a collection or a repertoire, from a museum or from daily life. It doesn't matter that much. And surprise, surprise, as Michele Stefano stretches in her volume on intangible heritage, the current framework of UNESCO ICH relies heavily on traditional museum practices. In that traditional museological methods as inventorying, documenting, are extended to living persons, their knowledge, practices, artifacts, social worlds, and life spaces. As Waldemar Hafstein calls it, the ICH inventories result in thingification, in itematization and artifactalization. Traditions become part of a beauty contest. And today, for a change, I argue that this is not a bad thing. I argue that we don't have to worry too much about the fact that decontextualized things, that this is not a bad thing. We cannot escape it. We do it all the time. The only thing we have to do is to be aware of what is happening. What are we looking at? And to discuss together, what is it that we are looking at? What is it as a decontextualized thing? The thing can even be a whole community located in a certain place. It can be anything. What else can be found in a network? I talked a bit about objects and repertoires, but the network I'm building today, with the aim of sharing with you a certain way of dealing with ICH in a super diversity society. The super diverse society also consists of people. People with their individual interests, feelings and emotions. So we can add these people in all their diversity to our network visualization. This idea of the individual is important. As Marloes Willemsen and I have stated elsewhere, the significance of heritage is too often and easily considered as being the result of a shared sense of connection with an item. But feelings of affinity alone do not provide for the valuing of things and practices in everyday life. The same item can also incite feelings of dislike or rejection, reflecting alternative histories and presence, and implying alternative visions of the future. We argue that this divergence does not necessarily disqualify practices or things as items of heritage, not even for those who feel negatively about it. The shared identification of practices as heritage does not require the sharing of the same emotions around them. Heritage making with emotion networking in mind then comes down to an active, continuous and multi-perspective invitation to discuss an item's meaning, or to discuss items' meanings. Rather than only involving like-minded members of communities, heritage workers must consider everyone with an emotion about a heritage item to become part of an irregular network of emotions, including ourselves as heritage workers. A focus on communities of like minds does not fit metropolitan realities, which are much more fluid and more individualized. Opting for a different approach, we argue for an active quest for alternative voices to be confronted with each other in conversation and exploration and visualization of these different voices. This comes down to addressing the different views, interests and emotions existing and arising around a heritage item. Let me now give you some examples of this approach, how this approach might look like in everyday practice. We started our sort of exercise and reflections on this idea of how to deal in a different, more networked way with heritage, how to approach this with the series Intangible Heritage with Pop, organized by Imagine IC, and you will hear more about Imagine IC later on, when Marloes Willemsen takes the floor, organized by Imagine IC in collaboration with the professorship of the Rijnwaard Academy. At this series of events, we stage phenomena such as the sound of street soccer, tradition of commemoration of slavery, a Hindustani morning prayer, and newly invented Ketikoti traditions. And we annotated them by a mixed audience. This series was followed by a second one of events, and it's still going on, initiated again by Imagine IC in collaboration with the Rijnwaard Academy, titled Stadsgevoel, in this city feelings. In this series, the focus is even more on specific items: an empty building, the commemoration of the abolition of slavery, illustrated by a monument, and a monument as a starting point, or recently objects related to the commemoration of the airplane crash in the Bijlmermeer. In the slipstream of this series of events, and this is an example of how we sort of talked about and addressed the emotions in the audience. And we started to work with emojis to sort of card indexing or inventorying the emotions. So this was at the start of this sort of this project. Then in the slipstream of this series of events, we started to give emotion networking workshops for different audiences at various occasions, more or less along similar lines, each time choosing a specific item, putting it on display, and inviting participants to share their emotions with each other. The items differ. So these are various examples. This is one research conference at the LKCA in Utrecht, where we choose to participants to share their emotions on the Elfstedentocht, the typical Dutch phenomenon. And we started to do some mind mapping exercises. And then this might be familiar for you, because at a certain moment, a certain workshop, it was at the Historische Dagen in Utrecht, quite recent, we started this exercise of emotion networking by asking, look at your partner, or look at the one who is sitting next to you, and write and draw the portrait. We collected the portraits, and this was our network to start with. And then the item of the day, and I hope now the next slide, it was not Wilhelmus, but it was the song, the Wilhelmus song. And I was so nervous when we did it the first time that I started singing. Wilhelmus van Nassau, and okay, and people were sort of, oh, okay, what is happening here? And then we explained, this is today's item. And we have a network, we have a recording of the song, the national hymn. And then we started sort of to work on people's individual emotions. And at this occasion, at the Historische Dagen, it were all historians. 10 minutes left? Or, yeah, okay, fine, perfectly fine. Historians, and strange things happened. I mean, not strange, but it's sort of, people felt uncomfortable. They felt insulted because we just started singing this national hymn. So someone said, I only sing it once a year on 4th or 5th of May, and now you start joking with it and playing. And another one, I said, I don't know the text, I feel excluded. I don't like it that you are so sort of gimmicking and laughing about it. It's a serious thing. So it was really a tense atmosphere. Some people didn't want to take part in this exercise with Post-its. And then another, even more recent, we did the same exercise with the Wilhelmus again at the National Science Agenda Conference. And I was more quiet, so I said, okay, singing, are you all comfortable? And these were people from different backgrounds, from the ministry and from cultural institutions. And people started singing, and it was nice. No tensions at all, mind mapping, everything was fine. And then we said, okay, now we make a single object exhibition out of it. So there was the recording, and there were the portraits, and we added the mind maps. And then the final exercise was that we started to reflect upon what we did. What have we been doing? What are we looking at? How can we share our emotions and things? And last week, because now we become so enthusiastic about this method, or tool maybe, so we keep doing it. I tried it on my own colleagues at the Rijnwaard Academy. This is Mr. Rijnwaard. The academy is named after him. And we have a portrait in the hall, so we started to, oh, maybe the next, can you? Yeah, so we started to sort of work on Rijnbart and the different emotions. And my colleagues are very sort of, they wrote a lot. You saw the other, it was only a post-its with nice, ugly, terrible, shameful, but they started writing. And then, of course, we have, the Rijnbart Academy is an academy for cultural heritage and exhibition making and museums. So we have exhibition makers. Paul Giese is one of them. Next one, please. Yeah. So we had this mind map, and then mind maps. I can go back to it, but next one, please. Oh, yeah. So they started to make a real exhibition out of it, not a two-dimensional, but a three-dimensional exhibition, and they felt free to sort of do something with Rijnbart. So they covered his portrait and they started to draw on it, not the real object, but the copy, but anyhow. So we got some more inspiration for how to work in this way. And then at Erasmus University, where I give an elective in the master program, the course is called Traveling Things. Also, students are invited to choose a specific item to compare and to discuss. So, this way of working with heritage, this focus on single items, proves sort of to be useful in educational settings. It proves to make, or we think it makes people, lecturers, students, aware of alternative ways of viewing the world. You could even say it's a sort of critical heritage literacy. It is a new perspective on heritage making. It widens their scope. It shows how individuals can change maybe their outlook and combine perspectives, change their position by talking and discussing. It's important to realize this when dealing with networks that involve the development of education programs, but also when dealing with these programs themselves. And from January onwards, Marloes and I and other colleagues, here are the portraits. Oh, next one. Sometimes it's working, sometimes not. Yeah, we got funding for a project and we start to explore this more with the special focus on religion. I can tell you more about it if you want, but not for now. That would take too much time. But so we go on with it. And I can tell you that there are a lot of challenges still to be solved, or challenges to be met, to reflect on. One of them is how to visualize these dynamics, how to visualize these, next 5 minutes, yes. So we made steps towards the development of a tool that shows how people, by getting out of their bubble, their community, and exchanging thoughts about heritage items in various companies or various settings, can change their position, and maybe, who knows, can get nearer to each other. So we aim for a visualization, imagination, mirroring, displaying the multitude of voices and shifts that might occur in people's positions and in object items. So again, there is this sort of mapping method, and again, this is a slide I borrowed from the internet. And then we want to see how this multi-voice and multi-approaches, how they can sort of, in retroaction, may be added to museal collections and archives, so that they become more multifocal, that they become enriched. One of our main aims is to help developing, also among visitors, museum professionals in museums, heritage skills, which we consider to be part of a form of critical heritage education, with lessons about heritage formation, including people's roles and responsibilities. It is not a complicated process, not necessarily so, and I hope that my examples have illustrated this convincingly. Now, Putting an item, choosing an item and putting it on display, this idea might come up to consider the option of inviting an artist for an artistic intervention. But our question is also, maybe we all are, as heritage professionals, as museum professionals, we are also sort of heritage makers. We are also artists. We are also make our own interventions. So what is the difference? And maybe we can sort of reflect on this. This is maybe something for a future conference, and this is also one of the questions Marloes Willemsen will address in her research. But for now, I would say it is enough to state that an open network perspective should sort of drive our attention to the subjective role of the professional and to our own emotions. This focus on emotions might frighten some of you in our world that seems dominated by alternative facts. It may also bring fear, because at the end of the day, the outcome may be also the rejection of a certain tradition or item. And this is really, I think, challenging to think about. The debate about the item also opens up the discussion about an eventual rejection of knowledge and skills, of not appropriating it in a certain manner. David Sutton opens his article in the volume Sensible Objects, and where he writes about cooking. How, after all, did my grandmother acquire her culinary magic? It required an elder, not just willing, but determined to share her powers with a neophyte. And it requires an upstart who craved to follow the paths treaded by forebears. Is it possible that none of them wanted to be her, so that the tradition sort of vanishes? What will happen with all these old empty churches, farms, sheds, etc., all this heritage? Who is taking care of them? In other words, what is our role in this? We don't know what the outcome of the exercise will be. So, to conclude, where do intangible cultural heritage and museums meet? We, as human beings, are connected through items, as actors in a network. By making single object exhibitions and work on these items, we can make connections stronger or weaker. The main challenge is in the selection of items and the way how we deal with it. Start to process this. The IMP project wants to build capacities of more and more museums in order for them to take up a role in the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage of members of intangible cultural heritage communities, groups, individual practitioners who wish to transmit their cultural practice to future generations. I take a somewhat different position in that I want to leave open that sometimes we will not be able, or we do not want to help to transmit certain practices. But what we do share is a wish to contribute to a better world. A network visualization perspective, a network perspective, might help to make people aware of their individual position and empower them to take responsibility as actors for the choices they make, we make, they make. It helps them, us, to better understand what they are doing. Museums are sites where many notes, collections and repertoires can be found. The only thing we have to do is to show how these notes are connected. Thank you.